Most people looked at Elon Musk's bedside table and saw the obvious things first. The setting, the lamp, the objects, the strange, slightly chaotic atmosphere of a private moment suddenly made public. But sometimes the loudest details are not the ones that matter most. Sometimes the real clue is the thing your eyes almost skip over. In this case, it is the 4 cans of caffeine-free Diet Coke. And at first, that sounds almost too small to take seriously. Why focus on soda cans when the image contains so many other things competing for attention? Because certain details matter not because they are dramatic, but because they are quietly revealing. They sit there, almost ordinary, until you start asking the right question. And the right question here is not just, why is that on the table? The deeper question is, why 4 cans? Why caffeine-free? And why does that detail feel stranger the longer you look at it? That is where this begins. Because this is not just Diet Coke. It is caffeine-free Diet Coke. And that changes the feeling of the image in a subtle but important way. The can still carries the same identity, the same branding, the same familiar shape of stimulation, the same modern, industrial, always-on energy that Diet Coke has represented for years. But the force inside it has changed. The stimulant is gone. And yet the ritual remains. That may be the first real layer here. 1 can would feel incidental. 2 cans might still feel casual. But 4 cans begins to suggest something else. Not random clutter. Not a leftover. A pattern. A reserve. A repeated choice. A small private system that has already been built into the environment. And once you notice that, the image starts to shift. Because now you are no longer looking at a drink. You are looking at a habit that stayed in place even after the original charge was softened. That is what makes this detail so interesting. Not because it proves anything dramatic on its own, but because it hints at a larger pattern hiding inside a very ordinary object. And once that possibility appears, the image becomes harder to unsee. Because the cans are no longer just sitting there. They are beginning to ask a bigger question. What does it mean when the form of stimulation remains, even after the force has been reduced? That is the next layer. To get there, you have to slow down and think about what Diet Coke represents in the first place. It is not just a drink. It belongs to a whole style of modern life. Speed, convenience, routine, productivity, function. A world where people are expected to stay alert, stay active, stay engaged, and keep moving. Diet Coke has always felt tied to that kind of energy. But caffeine-free Diet Coke suggests something slightly different. It suggests that the original full-strength version may no longer be the point. The body may not want the full hit. The system may not tolerate the same pressure forever. The original force may have become harder to carry. But instead of abandoning the ritual is preserved. The object stays. The cue stays. The familiarity stays. Only the intensity changes. And that may be one of the clearest patterns of modern life. Because this does not just happen with drinks. It happens everywhere. People keep the form and soften the payload. They keep the appearance of stimulation while reducing the original cost. They keep the routine while changing what the routine delivers. They keep the object because the object now means more than the function it once served. That is when something shifts. The can is no longer just about chemistry. It becomes about memory, about continuity, about the comfort of repetition, about preserving a recognizable version of life, even when the deeper engine has started to change. That is why this small detail feels bigger the longer you sit with it, because it starts to resemble something many people already live inside. Think about how often the modern world works this way. Social media does not need to overwhelm you every second. It only needs to keep you coming back. Work culture does not need to shout all day. It only needs to make constant output feel normal. Consumer culture does not always need the full original promise. It can survive on lighter versions, softer versions, lower friction versions, as long as the behavior continues. That is the pattern that begins to emerge here. Not maximum force. Maintained return. That phrase matters, because once a loop can survive with reduced intensity, it becomes more durable in a strange way. It no longer depends only on impact. Now it depends on familiarity. And familiarity is powerful. Familiarity can make things feel harmless. Familiarity can make things feel necessary. Familiarity can make things feel like part of the natural shape of daily life. That is how ordinary objects begin to do deeper work. Not by dominating attention, by blending into the rhythm of a person's existence. That is what these four can start to suggest. A repeated return, a stable cue, a ritual that still belongs to the room, still belongs to the routine, still belongs to the person, even though the force inside it has already changed. And once you see that, the question becomes even bigger. Because now this is no longer just about why the cans are there. Now it is about what kind of world teaches people to keep the shell of a habit alive, even after the original charge has started to fade. That is where the image opens again. And maybe that is the real reason this detail lingers. Because it reflects something uncomfortable about the age we live in. We live in a world increasingly full of softened substitutes. Things that keep the shape of the original experience, while quietly changing what is actually being delivered. Connection gets replaced by interface. Rest gets replaced by coping routines. Meaning gets replaced by engagement. Health gets replaced by branding. Freedom gets replaced by a more comfortable version of dependence. And most of the time, this does not feel extreme. That is what makes it powerful. It feels manageable, reasonable, personal, easy to carry forward. It feels like normal life, just slightly adjusted. And that may be the deeper meaning, hidden in something as small as 4 cans of caffeine-free Diet Coke. The image seems to show more than a preference. It seems to show a structure. A structure where the original force becomes too costly, too intense, or too unsustainable. But instead of disappearing, it survives in a softer form. The shell remains. The cue remains. The ritual remains. And once the ritual remains, people can begin living inside it without even feeling that it is a substitute anymore. That is the unsettling part. Not that the cans are there, but that they feel so easy to understand. Because many people are already surrounded by versions of the same pattern. A habit that has outlived its original purpose. A system that no longer needs maximum intensity to hold attention. A familiar object that now does more work as a signal than as a substance. That is when something stops being just a preference and starts becoming part of the environment. Part of the rhythm. Part of the self. Part of the way a person continues. And that is why the image feels quietly revealing rather than loudly shocking. It does not scream. It reflects. It reflects a culture that often does not let go of its rituals cleanly. A culture that keeps the visible form of stimulation, performance, and continuity close at hand, even after the deeper force has begun to shift. So in the end, the meaning of those 4 cans may not be about soda at all. It may be about what happens when a civilization becomes so dependent on certain loops that it no longer needs the original intensity to keep them alive. It only needs the familiar version, the survivable version, the livable version. And once something becomes livable, it becomes much harder to leave. That is the final layer. Not that the system is strongest when it is loudest, but that it may become strongest when it learns how to stay with us in quieter forms. The can stays. The loop stays. Life keeps moving. And over time, the softer version no longer feels like a substitute. It just feels like life. If this made you see the image a little differently, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more. Look closer, see further, decide for yourself.